Hi everyone, and welcome to my University of Greenwich LGBT plus staff forum profile page. I'm David Evans, OBE, National Teaching Fellow and a Senior Lecturer in Sexual Health. Of course, I wasn't always all of these titles and job descriptions. I actually left school at 16 with only 2 O-levels, not even enough to start nursing with, but I commenced nursing at the age of 17 by sitting an entrance test to get in and then achieving honours in my orthopaedic diploma, and then I went on to state registered nurse, as we used to be called in those days, and that's a picture of me there, probably around about the age of 22. We've been asked to address a few questions or statements within our profile, so here's the first one on what I think. Well, I wasn't born into the equality that young people actually celebrate and enjoy today around LGBT people's rights and equalities. I was born in 1957, the year of the Wolfenden Committee report. And there have been many occasions over these intervening years when I've actually stood outside Parliament on various protests, shouting for equality for LGBT people as we face various discriminations. And it's lovely now because I actually attend meetings within Parliament at the all-party parliamentary group on sexual and reproductive health. So to think of where we've come from and where we are at the moment, it's absolutely spectacular. An interesting fact about me is, I'll come out here to you all, I would consider myself a multi-potentialite. That means I've had a few main careers throughout my life, and I'm lucky enough to be able to bridge the gap between these, but also to promote the good points of each one of them onto others. So first of all, I started off by doing 5 years nursing. Then I spent 7 years with the Catholic Church, eventually being ordained as a priest, and after a few years I left that and moved back into nursing. Within a few months I started teaching, and I've now been teaching sexual health and HIV studies since 1990. And in fact in 2017 that's how I achieved the officer status of the Order of the British Empire for services to nursing and to sexual health education. Another question we've been asked to address is how come we're seen as an LGBT role model? Well, of course, there have been many occasions where I've stood outside Parliament, as I just mentioned, but also in the classroom, because I actually present lots of sessions on gender and sexual orientations and on equality matters. And sometimes this isn't a message that always wants to be received by people. And that's great because the multi-potentialite part of me will say, well, I can draw on my past from nursing and sometimes even from religion, from the Catholic priesthood, to be able to address equality issues today. I was speaking to one class of just under 200 students a couple of years ago on these particular issues, and not only did I get a standing ovation and a round of applause at the end, but by the time I left the classroom I had 15 more people following me on Twitter, and as you can see here, somebody even started my own hashtag. And the reason why I think it's so important is just the way in which it has the capacity to influence people's lives. In 2016, one student approached me who had actually been in one of the classes that I'd been teaching. Now, I didn't know who he was at all. It was a class of about 200 students, and I taught them on a number of occasions. When he eventually came up to me in his 3rd year, he asked me to be his supervisor, and he started off by saying to me, "You don't recognise me at all, do you?" And I honestly didn't. And he said, "Well, you've been teaching me over the last 3 years in really huge classes, and the first time you taught us, I thought it was a bit of an insult to be taught by this big puff," and they were his exact words. So he walked out of the class. Now, I didn't notice that because people do tend to come and go. But he said over the time that I was actually teaching his class on a few occasions, that I'd actually transformed his life around LGBT people's issues. I'd sort of questioned him, questioning his whole belief systems, and it was a complete turnaround in a way, and that's why he nominated me for a Vice-Chancellor's Award, and I was a finalist at the 2016 ceremony. It's easy to answer this one, and you can probably tell by my accent that, yes, I'm not the only gay in the village. In fact, in my family, we've got gay, bisexual, lesbian, and even a few heterosexuals. So I'm originally from Cardiff, and with a name like David Thomas Evans and an accent like this, of course I'm from Wales. And it wasn't always easy growing up there. There was very much as a closed local town mentality in how I grew up. And one of the questions we're asked to explain here is what it was like to be LGBT then and growing up then. Well, in fact, I put the letter Q in because when I was a child in school, especially in 1967, when the first partial decriminalisation of male homosexuality took place, the words lesbian, gay, bisexual and transgender weren't even around then. The only one term that I ever heard anyone use, and that was usually in a derogatory way, and that was the term queer, which of course now is quite a reclaimed term, and I'm happy enough to use that these days myself. But back in those days, it was quite a negative term. The question on coming out is a bit difficult, especially as I really like studying queer theory. And within queer theory, sometimes there are questions that would ask things like, well, why do people even need to come out? What are you coming out of and what are you coming out into? Because we don't expect heterosexuals to come out, for example. So what's this whole notion about coming out? So I would say that within my own life, there have been numerous occasions when I've come out in that traditional sense of the term. Obviously, I realised my own sexual orientation and attraction as a very young boy. That was a growing awareness. But when I started nursing, the law had only just changed to the first partial decriminalisation. So sex under the age of 21 was still illegal in those days. So even though it went on, we weren't really out or talking about it. And then I spent the next 10 years with the Catholic Church, and in a way that was shelving the fact of having to come out, especially to my family, for example. But when I was studying to be a priest, there were quite a few of us who were gay. We were happy with our orientations, and we would always be out and supportive of each other, even though we weren't encouraged to be generally out about it. The question on whether I've had any difficulties in my working or personal life as a result of being gay, no, not really, except within my time in the Catholic Church. Catholicism, like many of the world's religions, still tends to be very, very homophobic from the point of view of many people, and therefore, obviously, it's a difficulty. Growing up in the Catholic Church, being a priest within that institution, knowing that the Church teaches one thing and yet being something else, was always something that I really tried to explore well. So the whole topic of sexuality has been something I've been interested in right from my childhood days. The BGD bit is in my local pub across the road. A lot of my straight friends over there, when I walk in, they'll refer to me as BGD, Big Gay Dave, and I'm even listed on their mobile phones as BGD. I really don't see this as anything problematic at all. In fact, it's a real term of endearment. And messages that I'd have for other staff at the university, especially if they're facing difficulties. Well, the key message is you're not alone. Greenwich is a really fantastic place to be LGBT. We're very proud of the fact of that. We're a Stonewall champion. We've got gender diversity acknowledged with a bronze award through Athena Swan. So it really is quite a good place. And I would say that if somebody is suffering in silence, please, there's no need to. And especially if you want to contact any of us in the LGBT staff forum, feel free to do so. How do I think being gay affects my work? Well, it's just like asking the question, how do you think breathing affects your work? Or how do you think living affects your work? It's part and parcel. Our sexual orientations, our attractions, affections, they're very much who we are. And to ask a question like this is also relevant to ask a heterosexual person, well, how do you think heterosexuality affects who you are? For me, I'd say it really affects the whole of my being. As you can see by the work I'm in, the people that I relate to, the publications I write, it's all so much a part of who I am and totally inseparable. And what would I like to see other colleagues doing? This is probably a really difficult question for me to ask, because I think working at Greenwich is an absolutely brilliant place to be lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and even heterosexual. It's just such a welcoming place that way. And it would be hard for me to actually address this, whether it's within my own faculty, in my own department, or right across the university. If I were to encourage you to have a look at some key texts, I'd recommend these two books. The one by Anthony Gray on speaking of sex is really good. It challenges our whole notions of how we approach ideas of sexual orientation. He's got two fantastic chapters in there. One is called Sex Hate and the other one is called Sex Shame. And he says that in most societies, people are brought up in these very negative ways, especially if they don't identify with the majority in their society, and the majority is usually heterosexual. And therefore there is a way that lots of LGBT people are brought up within this whole environment of sex shame and sex hate, and therefore any notion of coming out is something about coming out of that and into a very different world. So I'd say Anthony Gray's book is really key and a seminal text to read. Also, Michael Warner's The Trouble with Normal. Quite often if students say to me something about sexuality, and if they say that something is normal or natural, now I feel enabled to be able to question this whole notion of normality and what it is. And I'll give you a really quick example here. A student in one of these huge classes once said to me, shouted down from the back, he said, "David, look, if lesbian and gay children realise that they're lesbian and gay from a very early age on, why do they hide it? Why don't they just come out about it there and then?" As if to imply what Anthony Gray was saying, that they feel ashamed about it. So I said, well, look, let me turn that story around to you, that question around. And instead of me answering you, let me ask you a question. And I said this to the whole group. I said, I'm not expecting a response from you, but please think about this in your minds as I'm asking the questions. For those of you in the room who identify as heterosexual, how old were you when you realised you were straight? Who was the first person you ever told? How did your parents react? What did your best friend at school say? And so on. I asked a few more questions like that, because that's very much what's expected of LGBT people. And even this whole notion of coming out, it's not going to be a once and once only event. But quite often, many people feel inhibited by this because of negativities within their societies. And that's really important. And I hope I do just a tiny bit to chip away at those negativities. So that's it. That's the profile. Thank you all very much for listening. And if anybody ever wants to contact me, feel free to do so. My contact details are here. And the easiest way I'd say would be on Twitter at David_T_Evans. And thanks so much for listening. Bye bye.